My son cut me off for 15 years before I won the jackpot. Then, he invited me to meet his grandson. What I did next stunned him. I awoke alone on my 65th birthday like I had for the previous 15 years. As I trudged to the kitchen to make my morning coffee, the modest apartment in Portland felt more empty than normal. One sorrowful tiny card from the church was on my table, the only one I recalled. Aside from that, the photo of my son Richard frozen in time 15 years ago was the last one I had of him. I caressed his face through the glass, recalling the tiny child who couldn't sleep without my goodnight kiss and used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. How did we arrive here? How did I become the mother whose son pretended she did not exist? Working multiple shifts as a nurse when his father stepped away was not an option. It was about survival. Every extra hour allowed Richard to have the books he required, sports equipment, and finally college tuition paid for in full by me. But to him, those hours meant desertion. My financial prudence became dominating. My mentoring devolved into interference. The last breaking point was above $5,000. Just $5,000. Mom, this is once in a lifetime opportunity. MedTech Solutions is going to transform the market. His eyes had blazed with a familiar intensity, the identical expression he'd given 3 prior short items that had wiped all his funds. I can't, Richard. Can't. That money is for emergencies, I had said. His visage stiffened into something I couldn't identify. You've always been dominating and untrustworthy. How can you claim you love me while not trusting me? I said. You want my money, not my love. Words I'd regretted ever since. I made a decision on the morning of my birthday. No more lonely anniversaries. 3 hours later, I was parked outside of his Seattle house, a lovely 2-story home in an area I could never have bought on my nurse's wage. Through the window, I could see balloons. Of course, we had the same birthday. My kid turned 40 today. My hands shook as I pressed the doorbell. The laughing within died abruptly, footsteps approaching. Richard appeared successful in his costly sweater, his face stiffening at the sight of me. What are you doing here? The words dropped like ice between us. Before I could respond, a woman appeared alongside him. Vanessa is his wife. She looked at me with cold disgust. Today is not a good day, Richard muttered, closing the door, but not before I caught a glimpse of a toddler sprinting across the living room. I had never met this kid. My grandson. Please, I whispered. I just wanted to wish you happiness. You aren't welcome here. I thought I made it plain. The door shut in my face, leaving me standing alone on the porch, tears flowing down my cheeks as the celebration proceeded inside without a pause. After 15 years of separation, my own kid couldn't spare 5 minutes on our shared birthday. I drove home wondering which hurt more, being rejected again or knowing there was a kid inside who had no idea I existed. Months have passed. I attempted to immerse myself in volunteer work at the local library, where pages that required arranging would not judge or reject you. That's when I met Eleanor, an exquisite retired attorney with keen eyes that saw everything. You're carrying something heavy, she murmured one afternoon, slipping into the chair across from me. I knew the look. Initially, I deflected, but something about Eleanor's no-nonsense attitude penetrated my defenses. I soon started telling her everything. Richard represents alienation, my birthday tragedy. Have you tried writing to him? She asked. I laughed bitterly. Letters, emails, and birthday cards. 15 years' worth was either returned unread or disregarded entirely. Eleanor nodded attentively. But did you write the truth? Not what you think he wants to hear, but the plain truth. That night I wrote by hand until my fingers cramped. I spilled all upon those pages. How my controlling behavior sprang from the fear of losing him as I had lost his father. How seeing him from afar through common connections had been my sole link to his life. I truly wanted to know my grandson. No excuses, just the facts and an apology. 3 weeks later, a manila envelope came. My hands trembled as I opened it, hope swelling like a silly bubble. Inside were tattered fragments of my letter like jagged confetti. A yellow post-it note simply said, "Stop trying to enter our lives." I sat immobile, the shredded parts of my heart in my lap precisely like the letter. A box in my bedroom closet had 15 years' worth of unsent birthday gifts for a grandchild I didn't even know. That night, I added the ripped letter to my collection. The next day at the library, I overheard a mutual acquaintance announce Richard's promotion to Vice President of Marketing at Bright Path Industries, not MedTech Solutions, the firm he wanted my $5,000 for. A short internet search found that MedTech had declared bankruptcy 2 years after our disagreement. Curiosity drove me deeper online. Richard's social media posts depicted a perfectly manicured existence with a lovely family vacationing in exotic locales. He captioned one beach shot celebrating my promotion. Who needs family when you're successful? I closed my laptop, a peculiar peace overtaking me. After 15 years of asking for bits of affection, it was enough. I would cease battling for someone who had entirely left me out of his tale. That night, I collected all of the unsent cards and presents and put them in a storage container. I wasn't prepared to throw them away, but I did recognize that they belonged to a reality that would never exist. I muttered to the empty chamber, "Time to start living for myself." I had no clue how much one decision would alter everything. 1 year later, I could scarcely recognize my life. My little network of pals had expanded. I had joined a book group through the library. I even attempted water aerobics at Eleanor's prodding, but I still considered it glorified splashing. As I completed paying for my goods at Morgan's Market, the clerk inquired if there was anything more I needed. He motioned to the lottery ticket display. Jackpots up to $220 million. Everyone is buying tickets. I've never played the lottery. Too many years of witnessing patients play away their rent money had turned me off gambling. But something, maybe the achievement of going a whole year without contacting Richard, gave me pause. Why not? I handed her $2 and stated one ticket. The ticket remained forgotten in my handbag until 3 nights later when I unintentionally switched on the evening news over supper. The announcer's voice interrupted my thoughts. Tonight's Powerball numbers froze my hands in mid-bite when they flashed on the screen. Slowly, I reached for my purse and extracted the crumpled ticket. I checked 1, 2, and 3 times. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hardly hear the speaker declare there was a single winner in Portland, Oregon. I remained immobile in my chair until midnight looking at the ticket. $220 million. It was not real. It could not be genuine. But it was. The attorney I phoned the next day was similarly startled. "Ms. Wilson, do you realize that $128 million after taxes is a lump sum payment?" I nodded, feeling numb. "Oregon permits winners to remain anonymous by claiming via trusts or LLCs," he noted. "The name will be public record, but we may make it generic." As he explained the procedure, a recollection arose. Richard's expression when I declined him $5,000. His displeasure that I did not trust his judgment. Now I sat attempting to process more money than I could handle. The attorney said, "You have no idea how many people will crawl out of the woodwork. Family you haven't heard from in decades will suddenly recall how close you were." Family. The word lingered in the air between us. Richard's face flashed across my head, followed by a sight of my grandchild just before the door slammed in my face. A peculiar feeling crept on me, not exhilaration or enjoyment, but something sharper. For 15 years, I was helpless asking for scraps of attention. Now, for the first time, I had the cards. I added quietly, "Set up the trust, and I'd like to discuss how to keep this as private as possible." As I exited his office and stepped into the brilliant Portland sunshine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. 6 months passed as I followed my financial advisor's advice. I formed the Wilson Family Trust to accept the lottery prizes while keeping a quiet profile. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I continued to volunteer at the library, live in my apartment, and drive my 10-year-old Honda. Eleanor observed over coffee, "You are the most disciplined lottery winner I have ever seen." As my lone confidant, she'd seen me painstakingly prepare while avoiding the typical lotto-winning splurges. I said I learned discipline while raising a child on a nurse's salary. Furthermore, extravagant expenditure draws attention. I allowed myself one well-planned pleasure: a simple yet lovely 3-bedroom home in a quiet Portland neighborhood. To explain the acquisition to acquaintances, I casually mentioned selling a family property in the Midwest that had been involved in legal battles for years. 6 months after receiving my wins, I was sorting books at the library when my phone vibrated with an email notice. Richard Wilson, the sender, made my heart skip a beat. Mom, it has been a while. Sarah Miller told me you moved to a nicer house. Is everything okay? Maybe we should chat sometime. After 15 years of quiet, we get this casual note as if we had chatted only last week. I leaned on the bookcase, my hands trembling. That evening, I looked into Bright Path Industries and realized they were involved in a marketing ethical problem. Several executives were under internal inquiry. Richard's name featured in several articles. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Richard's unexpected interest after 15 years, just when his career life was crumbling, and after hearing, I could have made some money, I prepared a thorough answer. Richard, it's good to hear from you. It is nice to. Yes, I sold some family property and moved to a more secure neighborhood. How are you and your family doing? He responded within minutes. Warmer, longer, addressing his difficult workplace position and presenting my grandchild. Nathan is 12 now. He had always longed to meet his granny. Maybe we could have lunch sometime. Have you always wanted to meet with me? The boy who didn't realize I existed until Richard wanted something. I glanced at my phone, a peculiar calm coming over me. For 15 years, I would have given everything for this invitation. Now it seemed empty and translucent. Still, there was Nathan the innocent in all of this. A youngster deserved to know his grandma regardless of his parents' intentions. I'd love it, I said, even as my thoughts began to construct a plan. Richard chose Seattle's Harbor View restaurant, which was posh enough to impress and featured floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. I came early, dressed simply but elegantly, in a blue dress that I had splurged on. My sole outward surrender to my newfound affluence was my automobile, a new Volvo SUV that I rationalized as safer for possible grandchild visits. Richard, Vanessa, and Nathan arrived exactly on schedule. Richard appeared leaner than I recalled, with strain on his lovely face. Vanessa was impeccably dressed in fancy clothing that couldn't conceal her calculating eyes. And Nathan, who was tall for a 12-year-old, had Richard's eyes and a wary face that crushed my heart. I spoke softly to Nathan, fighting the temptation to hold him. I'm delighted to finally meet you. The child cast an apprehensive glance at his father before extending his hand properly. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. You can call me Grandma, I said, or Margaret if that is more comfortable. Richard led us to our seat and quickly dominated the discussion with anecdotes of Nathan's academic accomplishments and athletic successes, as if he were presenting a CV, rather than discussing a child. Richard and Vanessa grilled me during lunch regarding my inheritance from the family property. Vanessa observed, looking at my plain necklace as if analyzing its value. I deflected, concentrating instead on Nathan. What courses do you prefer in school? His eyes brightened up. Science and history. In fact, I'm now working on a research about immigration patterns. My instructor claims Nathan excels at everything, Richard interrupts, top of his class, like I was. Nathan's shoulders fell slightly with the interruption, and his enthusiasm faded. It brought up unpleasant memories of Richard at that age when his father dismissed his talents. When the check arrived, Richard patted his pockets dramatically. I think I left my wallet in my other jacket. I smiled calmly, seeing the costly watch still on his wrist, and paid the bill without remark. In the parking lot, Richard casually said that we are going through a difficult time, that the firm is reorganizing, and that Nathan's private school tuition is due shortly. I nodded non-committally. I am just thrilled we are reuniting. Nathan approached me nervously as Richard and Vanessa were arguing beside their car. He remarked quietly, "You don't seem sick." He looked uneasily at his parents. Dad claimed you had a brain ailment that left you disoriented and feeble. That's why you never came or phoned. My heart froze. Before I could react, Richard harshly summoned Nathan. The child instantly grabbed my phone and began typing something before sprinting back to his parents. Driving home, I checked my phone. Nathan had provided his contact details in a short note. Can we chat sometimes? Tears obscured my eyes, but they were no longer from despair. They came from something even more deadly. Rage. Richard continued communication in the weeks after our lunch, with each message barely concealing references to his financial struggles. Meanwhile, I maintained a cautious connection with Nathan via text messages, never openly challenging Richard's falsehoods, but instead sharing anecdotes of my active charity work and travel with friends. "Did you actually climb Met Hood last year?" Nathan texted one evening. "Dad mentioned that your condition made it difficult for you to walk at times." I answered, "The view from the summit was breathtaking," adding a snapshot of me at Timberline Lodge. "I've always enjoyed hiking." He responded fast. Dad must have been bewildered at the time. One afternoon, Nathan announced his impending history lecture. "It's about immigration trends, including how your parents immigrated to America. I hope you could go, but it is on a Thursday next month." My pulse accelerated. I could drive up to get it. "Really, I can add you to the visitor list." Each student is allotted 4 family spots. The day of the presentation, I arrived at Seattle Prep an hour early, my heart thumping as I checked in at the front desk. The receptionist smiled kindly. "You must be Nathan's grandma. He's ecstatic you're here." In the corridor, I met Nathan's history teacher, Mr. Collins, who shook my hand heartily. "Dear Mrs. Wilson, Nathan has been telling us you might arrive. It's great to finally meet you." "Finally?" I asked. "Well, yeah. After years of hearing about your health, it's amazing to see you doing so well. Nathan performed a full research on neurodegenerative disorders last year based on your expertise. The floor seems to shift under me. What is my condition?" Mr. Collins seemed uneasy. "What about early onset dementia?" Richard explained at each parent-teacher meeting why you couldn't travel or manage social situations. "Nathan even raised funds for studies." He trailed off after noticing my look. "You didn't know." I supported myself against the wall. Richard had not just shut me out of their lives. He'd concocted a complex story depicting me as mentally incompetent. While I was sending cards and letters pleading to be included, he informed everyone, including my own grandson, that I was too unwell to function. The presentation started before I could digest this revelation. I sat uncomfortably in the back row, watching Nathan confidently discuss his family history, which I'd offered in my texts and masterfully integrated into his tale. When he noticed me, his expression brightened briefly before returning to his presentation. Later, while families gathered in the corridor, I noticed Richard and Vanessa arrive and examine the throng. When Richard noticed me chatting to Mr. Collins, his face turned pale. "What are you doing here?" He screamed and pulled me away. Nathan welcomed me, and I responded calmly, but my heart raced. "It's interesting that Mr. Collins acknowledged my problem. You've been discussing dementia to everyone for years." Richard's gaze flashed about the room. "This is not the place." "No," I agreed, my voice calm, despite my quivering palms. "It is not. But Richard, we shall address it. Soon." As I went away, Nathan caught up with me grinning. "You arrived." I hugged him in our first embrace. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed Richard's icy, calculating glare. The lines had been drawn, and for the first time in 15 years, I was no longer at a disadvantage. Did he tell everyone I had dementia? Eleanor nearly dropped her tea when I told her about the school bombshell. "That's awful, Margaret." I nodded, the disbelief giving way to a smoldering rage that I scarcely recognized in myself. While I was sending cards and presents, he told Nathan that I was too unwell to recognize him. Eleanor laid down her cup with the precision of someone suppressing wrath. "What are your next steps?" I'm not sure I admitted. A part of me wants to expose him to tell Nathan everything, but this would only harm the youngster. "What about the other part?" I met her look carefully, wanting to know how deep this is. The next day, Eleanor introduced me to Martin Reeves, a discreet private investigator whom she had previously utilized in her legal career. She told me that this was only information collecting. Nothing is unlawful. Martin's discoveries went beyond my wildest suspicions. Richard was drowning in debt with his home underwater credit cards, maxed out in high-interest loans. The Bright Path affair featured marketing strategies that inflated the advantages of some pharmaceuticals while downplaying the adverse effects with Richard's permission. Martin said that he is considering a termination. The corporation is undertaking internal investigations before the FDA becomes involved. Martin discovered something very frightening in Nathan's school records. Richard and Vanessa sought for his transfer to an international school in Vancouver, Canada. The application needed a large payment and verification of Canadian residency within 30 days. They were going to run with my money. Richard's pressure increased, and his signals became less subtle. Nathan said during one conversation that his school's tuition is rising, and given the current state of the property market, we may need to severely downsize. Vanessa mistakenly left investment brochures promoting Vancouver property developments visible in the background during a video conversation intended for Nathan to show me his science project. I kept my oblivious compassion while laying my trap. I disclosed my upcoming appointment to a financial advisor, changed my will to include Nathan, and arranged for Vanessa to inadvertently discover hefty bank statements in my handbag during a quick coffee encounter, revealing only a percentage of my fortune, but enough to hook them entirely. "This is incorrect," I muttered to Eleanor after outlining my machinations. "I am becoming as calculating as they are." She grasped my hand. "The distinction is in your eventual goal. They intend to take advantage of you and then go. You want to safeguard Nathan and perhaps rebuild something real." That night, Nathan texted me, "Dad and Mother are arguing a lot. I heard them mention Vancouver again. Dad claims you're the answer to everything if he can only complete the transaction quickly. What does this mean?" I gazed at my phone. It's heartbreaking for this boy to be caught up in his parents' plans. Whatever occurred next, Nathan deserved better. "I'm not certain, dear," I said. "But do not worry. I pledge to always be here for you no matter what." It wasn't a promise I'd breach, unlike the ones Richard had made throughout the years. Richard continued, his smile barely reaching his eyes. "I appreciate you making time for dinner for just the two of us." He'd selected another costly Seattle restaurant much above his financial means. "Of sure," I said, looking at my kid across the table. In the dim illumination, I could still see the youngster I'd reared a glimmer beneath the desperate man he'd become. Richard started into a clearly scripted speech on family healing designed to tug at my heartstrings. "I've been too arrogant," he said with studied humility, "hanging on to old grudges when we should have come together as a family." I nodded encouragingly, seeing how his gaze shifted to my handbag on the table. "Nathan adores you," he added. "He always talks about you. Having his grandma in his life has been quite significant." I really expressed my appreciation for our partnership. "He's a fantastic youngster." Richard leaned closer, his voice lowering. "Mom, I've been meaning to talk about something essential, an opportunity that could tackle several problems at once." I thought, here it comes. "I'm beginning a new business, a consulting firm that focuses on pharmaceutical marketing compliance." The irony, right? He laughed without humor. With my unique knowledge of what not to do, I could assist businesses handle rules responsibly. I remained fascinated as he described his company proposal, observing how the expected launch expenditures matched his current debt burden. "I'm providing you the opportunity to invest in something significant," he concluded. "Not only is this a profitable business, but it also invests in our family's future. If you help with this startup and maybe with our present cash flow issues, I guarantee you will be a permanent part of Nathan's life." My son was essentially selling access to my grandchild. "You're not asking for charity," I reminded him. "You are proposing a partnership in both business and family." He nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, and we'd be close. Well, quite close. Oh, Vancouver has a growing biotech sector. Nathan is already on the waiting list at Cambridge International Academy. It is extremely elite, accepting only 50 kids per grade. We need to reserve his position with a deposit by next week." I drank a sip of water, buying time. Vancouver or British Columbia, that's quite the move. A new beginning, he said calmly. "For every one of us, you are welcome to visit at any time." Exactly like Martin had discovered, they intended to seize my money and run across the border. "I'll have to think about it," I explained carefully. Richard's smile tightened. "Do not take too long. These opportunities have timelines." Nathan sent an SMS that night, "Grandmother, I overheard Mom and Dad fighting after you left. Dad stated they needed to finalize the agreement with the elderly lady before she changed her mind. I believe they meant you. They're discussing going to Canada, but they haven't told me anything. Please do not tell them I stated this. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, a peculiar peace washing over me. For 15 years, I had lamented the end of my relationship with Richard. Now I mourned something different, the guy I believed my kid was. It was time to put a stop to this charade. I'm delighted you could all come for the weekend, I said, greeting Richard, Vanessa, and Nathan into my Portland home. I recommended they come to discuss my investment selection. They were unable to resist the bait. My new home was pleasant but not lavish, which was a deliberate decision to keep my cover narrative. Still, I watched Vanessa's gaze, cataloging each thing and mentally calculating its value. Beautiful sight, Mom. Richard spoke, his gaze resting on the original artwork in my foyer. This is a significant step up from your previous flat. The family home sale went well, I responded faintly. Nathan, would you want to see the room I have prepared for you? There is a telescope on the balcony. On nice days, we can see Mount Hood clearly. I kept a close eye on Richard and Vanessa all weekend. When I wasn't looking, they played loving parents, but at unguarded times their displeasure with Nathan was palpable. They interrupted his narrative, ignored his interests, and gave him annoyed looks when he asked questions. When Nathan was alone with me, he visibly relaxed, his nervous stammer fading and his enthusiasm for science and history surfacing in lively chats. He reminded me of when I was younger, before the bitterness had set in. Saturday afternoon, as Richard and Vanessa went on a stroll, which I assumed was a strategy session, Nathan showed me a brochure he discovered in his father's briefcase. He mentioned Cambridge International Academy, referring to images of an imposing structure. In Vancouver, I saw Dad's briefcase was open. I don't want to go there, Grandmother. All of my buddies are in Seattle, and I just found you. I held him strongly. Whatever happens, we will not lose contact again. I promise. That evening, I made a wonderful meal. I'd spent the day preparing Richard's childhood favorites, including pot roast with carrots and potatoes, toasty buns, and apple pie for dessert. As we sat, Richard and Vanessa exchanged knowing glances. They saw this sentimental dinner as my surrender. After dinner, I invited everyone into the living room. I declared, I have something important to share, as Richard and Vanessa leaned forward eagerly. Richard, 15 years ago, you stormed out of my life for money. I wouldn't loan you $5,000. Today it appears like money is the only thing bringing you back. Richard's smile wavered. Mom, it isn't fair. I lifted my hand and silenced him. I hired a private investigator. Richard's cheeks drained of color as I placed a folder on the coffee table. He recorded everything. The falsehoods about my dementia, your financial issues, the Vancouver plans you are keeping from Nathan, and the Bright Path probe. I understand why you suddenly recalled having a mother after 15 years. Vanessa rose abruptly. This is ridiculous. Did you spy on us? I shielded myself and corrected quietly, and Nathan Richards' surprise gave way to fury. So the entire reconciliation was really a setup. You are no better than you profess to be. The difference, I explained gently, was that I truly wanted to know my grandchild. You merely wanted my money. Nathan's words cut through the tension. Is this true, Dad? What about Grandma's disease? What about Vancouver? The stillness that followed provided all the confirmation he needed. The next morning, after a night of unpleasant facts, we reconvened in my living room. Richard seemed tired, Vanessa tight, and Nathan, whose my heart hurt for, had the puzzled face of a boy whose world had moved beneath his feet. I have a proposal, I replied, laying a manila envelope on the coffee table. Richard looked at it curiously. More investigative reports. No, it's a potential solution. I provided a detailed summary of my terms. I would pay off their mortgage and set up an educational trust for Nathan with stipulations. They must stay in Seattle. Nathan would spend 1 weekend each month with me. Richard would tackle the Bright Path matter head on instead of running, and most crucially, all of us, including me, would attend family therapy. Vanessa remarked plainly, "You are bribing us." I corrected, "I'm suggesting a road forward. Not simply throwing money at the problem and hoping it goes away, as was your idea, right?" Richard's cheeks reddened with rage. "You have no right to control our life." "No, I don't," I agreed. "You are free to decline. Continue your Vancouver plans if you can afford them. Try to evade the Bright Path probe. Regardless, Nathan remains in my life. You cannot." I can appeal for grandparent visiting privileges, I said, especially given the proven pattern of lying you followed. Eleanor has already prepared the papers. It was a calculated risk. Grandparents' rights were difficult to enforce, but Richard didn't realize it. You are blackmailing us, he replied, his voice trembling. I said, I'm offering you the opportunity to rebuild something real, not founded on deception or money, but on integrity. It will not be easy. Trust has been broken from all sides, but Nathan deserves better than what we've given him thus far. Vanessa, ever realistic, examined the financial information in the package. We require time to discuss this. Nathan, who had been silent throughout, suddenly said, Why did you lie about Grandma all these years? He asked his father. Why did you let everyone know she was sick? Richard refused to face his son's gaze. It was complicated, Nathan. No. Nathan protested, his voice firmer than before. You lied because it was simpler than revealing the truth, and you did not want me to know her. In that moment, I noticed a change in my grandson, a knowledge of adult fallibility that some youngsters experience too early. He glanced at his father, not angry, but disappointed. Perhaps the most distressing thing a parent can see in their child's eyes. Nathan added quietly, I think Grandma's idea is good. I want to attempt therapy. I'd like to stay in Seattle with my buddies. I want her in my life. Richard gazed at his kid as if he were seeing him for the first time, not as an extension of himself or a piece in his life's chess game, but as a distinct individual with his own ideas and emotions. Nathan, he started but appeared unable to continue. Vanessa grabbed for the papers, her practical side showing itself. We'll go over these phrases, she said sternly. As they prepared to depart that afternoon, Nathan hugged me tightly. He muttered, I'll see you in 2 weeks, whatever they decide. It wasn't a question, but rather a statement, a boy's first assertion of independence as his own person. In that moment, despite everything, I sensed a glimmer of optimism. 18 months later, I am adjusting the birthday streamers in Richard's Seattle garden. Today we're celebrating 3 occasions, my 67th birthday, Richard's 42nd, and Nathan's middle school graduation. The gathering is tiny, consisting of relatives Eleanor, who traveled here with me, and a handful of Nathan's pals. The route to this point was not easy. Richard first accepted my requirements out of need rather than choice. He cooperated with BrightPath's probe, accepting a substantial demotion over firing. Vanessa initially pondered divorce, but soon understood her own involvement in their difficulties, including her status-seeking and propensity to ignore questionable decisions in order to retain their lifestyle. Our therapy sessions exposed unpleasant facts, including Richard's hatred of my long working hours when he was younger, my fear of abandonment when his father departed, and Vanessa's fears arising from her own broken family. We discovered layers of hurt that had been simmering for decades. The first 6 months were the most challenging. Richard would shut down emotionally during sessions. Vanessa swung between cooperative and passive aggressiveness. I tackled my own guilt for overly managing Richard throughout his adolescence. Nathan, stuck in the middle, eventually discovered his voice, forcing us grown-ups to consider how our actions affected him. Nathan's monthly excursions to Portland became hallowed time, first with Richard or Vanessa, then on his own after he reached 14. These trips gave a break from the stress that frequently remained at home and allowed for open talks away from the pressures of daily living. Things changed gradually, almost imperceptibly. Richard began to drop his barriers after realizing the implications of his actions and witnessing Nathan's success with me in his life. During one really painful session, he eventually acknowledged the reality behind his elaborate lying regarding my health. It was simpler to claim you were unwell than to acknowledge I cut you off out of pride. And then I was stuck in the deception for years. Now, as Nathan shows Richard his science fair presentation on the terrace, something unthinkable a year ago, Vanessa approaches with 2 glasses of lemonade. He's still struggling to pronounce it, she adds, gesturing at Richard. But things are changing. He mentioned you yesterday, recalling pleasant recollections that he had forgotten. Families are complicated, I respond. We all make mistakes from time to time. Later, after everyone has left, Nathan presents me with his gift, a photo album he has put together over the course of the year. combining old photos of Richard and me with new ones of all of us together. The last page features a current photo of the four of us with the simple remark, "Family imperfect, but ours." I recognized then that my genuine success was not the lottery, which is a secret I have never completely shared, though Richard and Vanessa periodically guess on the true source of my wealth. My accomplishment was realizing that family isn't created on perfection, but on endurance. Not with dollars, but with time. Not with vengeance, but with the strength to confront tough facts and start over even when it seemed impossible. That night in my hotel room, I finally opened the box containing the ripped parts of my letter and the presents that had never been delivered. I choose a few artifacts to keep as reminders of the journey, not as emblems of bitterness, but as markers of a tough route that eventually led to a better place. The past cannot be erased, but the future is being written one day at a time.